Hello everyone, Benji-Sales here, and we have finally made it. After such a long wait, tomorrow we are finally getting a brand new PlayStation showcase. And guys, I feel like this is going to be a very, very big one, considering how long Sony has gone without really talking about their first party hardly at all. We haven't had any big new AAA first party announcements from PlayStation Studios in quite a long time. It's been a hot minute, to be honest with you, because even though we've gotten some new PlayStation games over the last couple of years, they've mostly been games that were announced, quite a while ago, right? It was games like God of War Ragnarok, Gran Turismo 7, Horizon Forbidden West, right? It's primarily been games that we've known about essentially since the PlayStation 5 was revealed. So it's very exciting that we're finally, I think, going to get a major update on what exactly PlayStation Studios has been up to. This showcase is going to be over an hour long, quite beefy, by the way. And so let's start running through it. I thought I would make a video today to look at every single PlayStation studio, what exactly we know that they're working on, what we don't know what they're working on, and how likely or unlikely it is that they are going to appear at this showcase. Keep in mind, this is all just my opinions. This isn't any sort of like insider leak stuff. It's just working off of what is publicly known, what's publicly available, and getting hyped and excited for what we might be about to see. So let's start running through every PlayStation studio. First of all, we've got Bend Studio. Now, Bend, of course, the developer of Days Gone. It's been quite a few years since Days Gone. There's some wondering, what exactly is this studio up to? Well, here is what we know. They're currently working on a brand new IP. They say it's an open world game that is building off of kind of the foundations that they set in Days Gone. In other words, like the very deep systems that they have in place there. That's kind of the wording that they've used. Keep in mind, this is not a sequel to Days Gone. It is a brand new IP, but they did say that a lot of those systems and stuff that they developed while making Days Gone are going to show up in this new IP. It's an open world game, and it also will feature multiplayer. Now, we don't really know anything else about this other than that. There's been some job listings and things that hint towards, there being possibly vehicles involved in this game, but we don't know anything about the setting. We don't know anything about the story. I'm assuming it's going to have single player as well. They haven't said that this is like a multiplayer only game. They've simply stated that it will also feature multiplayer. So I'm guessing this is going to be one of those games that has both, right? Probably a multiplayer component and a single player component. So right now, I'm going to rank this one as a maybe. Okay, this is a maybe for me. I don't think that this is by any means a lock. I also, though, don't think it's impossible that we see it. This new IP has been in development now for a couple years, so it really just depends how early or not they want to announce this project. So to me, this lands firmly at a maybe. Now, next studio we're going to be looking at is going to be Bluepoint Games, right? Now, they have been known primarily as a remake studio, right? That's essentially what Bluepoint does. And they haven't had a game since Demon's Souls remake. So again, like Bend, they're more recent than Bend, by the way, for a new game. But it's been a few years. Here's the info that we have on them. Currently, their project is unknown. We don't know exactly what this studio is making. The only info we have off of it is that it is original content. Very interesting wording there, by the way. They did not say that this is a new IP. This actually could be something set in an IP that we know. All it is original content. You notice oftentimes that when a studio is making a brand new IP, they'll use that wording, or they'll say, it's in a brand new world, a brand new universe. They haven't said that. They've said original content. I find that wording very, very interesting, and it makes me wonder if Bluepoint's making a new game, but in an IP that we all know. Could not be. It could be a new IP as well. That's entirely possible. However, we just don't know. So this studio currently, their project is unknown. I am going to rank this one as another maybe. I think there's a pretty decent chance Bluepoint shows up here. They're a pretty efficient studio, and it has been a few years now since Demon's Souls remake came out. I don't think it's a lock because this is a studio that is, even though they're very efficient, as I just noted, they are, however, typically a remake studio. So it's going to be interesting to see how they adapt to now making their own original game. There are differences that you have to go through in development. If you're remaking something, it's still a challenge, but you have the bones there. You know exactly the scope for the most part. You know exactly the story, like all of this stuff is already set up for you. Whereas once you're doing an original game, you have a whole host of challenges that you haven't tackled before. So maybe that makes Bluepoint take a little bit longer on their next game than what we're typically used to them being. So I'm going to rank this as a maybe. I don't think it's impossible that Bluepoint shows up here, but I also personally don't think it's a lock. That takes us to our next studio, and that is Bungie. Yes, Bungie, guys, the massive, massive developer of Destiny, of course, known in the past for their work on Halo. This is going to be the first PlayStation showcase we've had since Sony has acquired Bungie, and I have a feeling that Sony has very, very big plans for what Bungie is going to be up to in the coming years. Now, here's the info that we have on what Bungie exactly is up to. They have multiple games in development, not just one. They have multiple that we know of. There is a new IP that is outright confirmed. Bungie has outright said that we are making a new IP. And there's also heavy rumors that they are rebooting Marathon. Now, Marathon is a franchise that Bungie made a long time ago. This franchise was around even before Halo. So this is going back to the roots of Bungie. There's rumors that this could be some sort of like extraction shooter set in the Marathon universe. However, keep in mind, nothing about Marathon is confirmed. The new IP is confirmed. But Marathon, we don't really know. We just do know that Bungie have outright said that they do have multiple games in development. And of course, there's going to always be more Destiny 2 content on the way, right? No matter what, of course, this franchise is so massively successful. The new season of Destiny 2 just launched. There's going to be more expansions. So there's always going to be more Destiny content in the pipeline. I'm going to rank Bungie very likely. I think it is very, very likely that Bungie is going to show up here. I don't go as far as a lock, because you never know. There's a slim chance Bungie could skip the show. But considering this is the first showcase since they purchased Bungie, I think Sony's going to want to really brag and show off what exactly this huge purchase for them is going to do. I rank it as very likely. Whether that's the new IP, whether that's the Marathon reboot, I think it's very likely that we see Bungie here in some sort of capacity. So that should be very exciting for Bungie fans. It'd be a pretty big surprise to me if they're not here. I didn't go as far as lock because I don't think it's 100%, but I think there's a very, very good chance that we are going to see Bungie here. That takes us into our next studio, Sprite. Yes, Sprite. This is a, fairly recent purchase for Sony. It's not their most recent, but it's pretty recent. Sprite is a pretty large studio, by the way, even though they don't have like the biggest name compared to some other studios that we kind of all know in terms of like workforce. Sprite's actually pretty large, and we also know that Sprite has multiple projects in development. They're currently working on a AAA Unreal Engine 5 horror game. That's going to be very exciting to people like me who love horror. And of course, I think we're all excited to see what Unreal Engine 5 is really going to be able to do this generation, because we haven't seen too many visual pushing games yet. And I think a lot of us are thinking Unreal Engine 5 is going to be, that moment. And we haven't had these big, huge AAA Unreal Engine 5 games start shipping yet. So pretty exciting. They're working on a AAA horror game. It is also heavily rumored that Sprite is working on Twisted Metal. Twisted Metal was originally in development, it sounds like, at Lucid Games, I believe. Sounds like that studio was taken off the project and it has now gone over to Sprite. Keep in mind, Sony has the Twisted Metal show coming up on Peacock, and there's heavy rumors that they're bringing that game series back as well. And now the rumors are it is Sprite that is going to be tackling that. I rank this as, again, just like Bungie, very likely. I think Sprite will be here, and I think that game is probably Twisted Metal. There's a chance that they could show the Unreal Engine horror game here, but I'm thinking probably not. I think if Sprite does show up, it will be Twisted Metal. It makes sense to start talking about Twisted Metal, considering that the show is starting very soon. Great way to tie in excitement for both the show and the game by kind of marketing these alongside of each other. So very likely, in my opinion, very likely that Sprite will be here. Not quite a lock, because you never know, but I think it's pretty likely that we see them guys. Next up after Sprite, we have another studio with an incredibly similar name, and that's going to be Firewalk, guys. Firewalk. This is a very new purchase for Sony. Firewalk just happened very recently. It was announced a while ago that Sony would be the publisher for Firewalk's game, but at the time, Firewalk was not owned by Sony, right? Sony was just going to be the publisher. It was going to be a PlayStation exclusive, well, PlayStation and PC, but they didn't own this studio. But that has changed. Sony has recently purchased them. Here's some info on the studio. They're currently making a new multiplayer IP. There are some heavy rumors that that is a sci-fi based multiplayer game. Keep in mind, not confirmed, but heavily rumored, and many former Bungie developers are at this studio. A lot of people that kind of left Bungie over the years have gone over to Firewalk, and considering, you know, how successful Bungie has been in the past, and considering Sony has purchased this studio before their first game has even shipped, that shows a lot of confidence, in my opinion, on what Sony thinks that this game is going to deliver. So pretty exciting stuff, I would say, if you're one of those people that's looking for maybe a big multiplayer shooter of some sort. We don't know for sure that it's a shooter, but it makes sense, right? If it's developers of Bungie, it just all kind of makes sense. I'm sure they're going to try and differentiate this from Destiny. You know, on the surface, that description sounds pretty similar to Destiny. So you'd be like, hey, why would PlayStation want both Destiny and a Destiny-like, you know, both coming from their first party now that Bungie's first party? I'm assuming, even if this is a sci-fi multiplayer shooter of some way, that Firewalk is doing something to heavily differentiate it from Destiny. So we'll have to see what that is. I rank this one as a maybe. You know, I rank this as a maybe. This game has been in development now for a few years. Sony just purchased this studio, so maybe they're going to want to show this thing off and be like, hey, this studio we just purchased, take a look at what they're working on. This is why we're confident. This is why we bought them. I don't rank this as a likely, because I just don't know how far into development this project really is. It's been in development for a few years, of course, but you know, new studio, new IP, those sort of things can take a very long time. So this definitely is just a maybe to me. It's a maybe, but it possibly could happen. Next studio we're going to talk about, that is Guerrilla. Yes, my beloved studio Guerrilla. I am such a fan of this studio. Boundary pushing technology. I just think Guerrilla is one of the best studios that Sony has. They're so incredibly talented. Here's what we know about Guerrilla right now. They're working on Horizon 3. That was outright confirmed very recently. I think it was actually just last month. We all assumed Horizon 3 was coming. No spoilers, but if you play Horizon Forbidden West, the sequel is very clearly set up. We all assumed that was going to be coming, but it's been outright confirmed that they're working on Horizon 3. Keep in mind, though, that game is going to be quite early in development. Forbidden West just shipped not that long ago. They just shipped the Burning Shores DLC, which was quite beefy. Horizon 3 is coming, but don't expect that until like an end-of-generation game. You know what I mean? They'll probably get it out on PlayStation 5, but I would not expect that until the very end of the generation. Who knows? Maybe even ends up being cross-gen, but that game is going to be years away still. They're also developing an online multiplayer Horizon title. We don't really have any other additional information on this other than that it's set in the Horizon universe and it's some sort of multiplayer thing. I think most of us are going to assume that that is some sort of, almost Monster Hunter-like game. It just makes way too much sense in the Horizon universe for it to be that. You have giant mech robot dinosaurs to fight, and yeah, that's a blast by yourself, but it would be really, really fun to do with other people as well. So we don't know. We just know it's a multiplayer game set in the Horizon universe. But I think it's safe to think that that's probably, some sort of Monster Hunter-like game. Like, it'd be very bizarre if it was just like a multiplayer shooter. Like competitive, that seems weird to me to do in the Horizon universe. It just doesn't really sound like that sort of game. Maybe it is some sort of competitive game in a different way, but if it was me, the thing that would make the most sense, it's just already there. It's right in front of you. Make a Monster Hunter-like Horizon game. That would, I think, go over very, very well. So I am going to rate this, though, as unlikely. I don't think it's very likely that we see Guerrilla here. As I mentioned, Horizon Forbidden West was not that long ago. Burning Shores literally just shipped. I mean, that game, or that expansion, only came out last month. Yes, I know the multiplayer title has been in development now for a while, but I still am thinking that there's going to be enough other things here to show right now that you just don't show Horizon multiplayer, really. I think you're going to have so many other things here that, need to be shown. I just rate it as unlikely. If they are here, it's going to be that multiplayer game. There's no way they're going to be talking about Horizon 3 yet, considering how far that is off. But I just think it's unlikely that they even do the multiplayer project here. So I'm going to rank Guerrilla as unlikely. Next studio, that is going to be Haven. Yes, Haven Studio. This is another brand new studio that Sony has purchased. They've never shipped a game before. They are brand new. Brand spanking new, just like Firewalk. Here's the info on them. It's a new studio founded by Jade Raymond. Jade Raymond, of course, had that legendary career at Ubisoft. She was a huge component of the Assassin's Creed titles and a whole bunch of the big games that came out of Ubisoft during that era. She hasn't had as much success, however, after leaving Ubisoft. So this is going to be very interesting to see what she does here with her own brand new studio. She's the founder. She's the leader here. Of course, there's a whole bunch of other people involved as well, but Jade Raymond is the big, person attached to this studio. We know that they're making a new multiplayer IP service game of some sort. However, it does not sound like a traditional multiplayer service game. Like, the little bit of info we have, it does not sound like this is some sort of shooter, really. It doesn't really sound like... I have a feeling whatever Haven's up to when we see it, we're all going to be like really surprised at what they're making. We know that Mark Cerny himself is so impressed by this studio that he's like working directly hands-on with them. Mark Cerny, the architect of the PlayStation 4 and the PlayStation 5, so that's a pretty big boon to know that, hey, the guy that's literally the architect of the PlayStation consoles is so impressed by what the studio is doing. Like, he wants to be involved. He wants to be like directly hands-on with what they're doing here. So pretty exciting stuff. I'm going to rate Haven as another maybe. I don't think this is a lock by any means because, again, just like Firewalk, it's a brand new studio. You don't know how long it's going to take for them to get their first project out the door. It's not a studio with a ton of history where we can be like, hey, they'll have a game out in 3 or 4 years. Like, we just don't know. We don't know. I think there's a chance. That's why I rate it as a maybe. This game is not brand new in development. It's been in development now for a little while. But this could go either way. I won't be shocked if Haven's here at all. I also won't be shocked if they completely miss this show. So that's another maybe on the list. That's going to take us into the next studio, Housemarque. Housemarque, of course, the developers of Returnal. Absolutely fantastic game. Really, really impressed by it. Pretty small studio. They are staffing up, but they're not like a big, ginormous studio like some of these other ones that we've mentioned are. The info that we have on them is actually really, really sparse. We know that they're working on a brand new IP. They have confirmed that their next game would be a new IP. But other than that, we don't really know anything about it. Just that Housemarque's making a new IP. It's not going to be a Returnal sequel, it sounds like. That doesn't mean that they won't make a sequel to Returnal at some point, but it doesn't sound like that's the next game. Who knows? This to me could be literally anything. Housemarque is a giant wild card here in terms of what their next game's going to be. Returnal was really nothing like any game they had made before. Yes, it had those like arcadey gameplay sort of components that they were known for, but it was much more big of a project than they've ever done before, way more story involved with it. It was really like nothing they'd ever made before, and their next project could be something similar, very different than anything they've ever done before. Giant wild card here for Housemarque. I'm going to rate them as unlikely. I think it's not very likely that we get a Housemarque announcement here. As I noted, the studio's not very big. It's not one of these studios with like 300 people that have a ton of dev workforce. They're pretty small. Returnal, I know it's been a couple years now, but I have a feeling, given the size of this studio and given the fact that it's a new IP they're working on, that's something that's going to take some time to get out the door. I would be pretty surprised if we see the next Housemarque game here. You never know. Maybe they'll surprise us, but I'm going to rate that as an unlikely. Next studio we're going to talk about is going to be Insomniac Games. Wow, Insomniac, what a powerhouse Insomniac has been for PlayStation ever since that acquisition. They've been pretty much the most output of any PlayStation studio that we've seen, basically. They've already launched multiple games on PlayStation 5. They had Miles Morales hit the system. They had Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart hit the system. They had Spider-Man Remastered hit the system. And they also have 2 games announced already. They have Spider-Man 2 and Wolverine on the way. So here's the info on them. Of course, as I noted, working on Spider-Man 2. That's going to be the main project right now that most of Insomniac's on. However, they also have a bunch of people developing Wolverine. So both those projects are being developed side by side. There's also some rumblings about a multiplayer title in development at Insomniac. They've done some hiring that basically says that. However, we don't know anything about what the multiplayer game is. We have no idea. Is it set in Spider-Man universe? Is it a Marvel game? Is it a Ratchet and Clank game? Is it a new IP? We literally know nothing about it. I think whatever the multiplayer thing isn't close at all, so I didn't even really include it here because we literally know nothing about that. So the 2 clear main projects right now are Spider-Man 2 and Wolverine. Guys, this one is locked in. It's the first locked in studio. There's 0% chance Insomniac's not here. Spider-Man 2 is going to get a big blowout here. I don't think it's going to be a short, 1-minute trailer. I think they're going to show you gameplay. I think they're going to show you, story components. I think you're going to get that release date, and who knows, you may even get things like collector's edition announcements or like custom PlayStation 5 bundle announcements. Like, those ones to me aren't a lock, but Spider-Man 2 getting a huge blowout and a release date here are locked in. 0% chance that doesn't happen. It is as locked in as you can get. I think there's also a decent chance that Insomniac does show Wolverine here as well. That project has been in development now for multiple years, and it wouldn't be the first time that Insomniac has doubled up in a PlayStation show. First of all, Spider-Man 2 and Wolverine were announced within the same show. And they also, a previous time before that, in another showcase, they had both Miles Morales and Ratchet and Clank in the same showcase. So there's definitely a chance that they double up here. Wolverine isn't a lock. Spider-Man 2 absolutely is a lock, but I would also rate Wolverine even as likely. I think there's a good chance you see both of these games. If they show Wolverine, don't expect a blowout like you're going to get for Spider-Man. Just expect maybe a quick trailer to kind of tell you what exactly this game is, because we haven't seen anything on Wolverine besides just, the quick CG teaser. Other than that, we don't know anything about it. So maybe they show Wolverine here with a 2024 release date, maybe. Not like an actual date, but maybe they say late 2024 or something like that. But either way, locked in, you are going to see Insomniac at this showcase. Next up, we've got London Studio. London Studio hasn't shipped a game in forever. This is a real wild card as well. However, we do know a little bit about this studio and what they're up to. They're currently developing an online fantasy combat game. Now, that game, this picture right here is literally concept art from it. We don't know a whole lot about it other than it's like this really cool sounding fusion of fantasy, but with like futuristic cyberpunk type setting in London, I believe. So it's like this really cool mix of fantasy and sci-fi, and it sounds actually in concept very, very cool. It sounds like this game does have a huge co-op component. Whenever they described it, it didn't talk much about competitive multiplayer. It was kind of like working together sort of thing. I think it sounds pretty exciting. But whether we'll see it here or not, this is going to be a giant maybe. This could go either way. I literally have no idea. Been in development for a little while now. This studio hasn't launched a game in forever. Maybe it happens, but I don't rate it as likely because London is such an unknown in terms of like when they're going to get a game out the door. So this lands at another maybe. Could completely go either way here. Next studio we're going to be looking at is Media Molecule. Media Molecule is a dev that desperately needs a hit. They have not had a hit in many, many, many years. Yes, they launched Dreams. However, Dreams was by no means a commercial success. And they need a hit. I'm just going to be honest with you. Out of every studio that we're talking about today, I think the studio that most needs a hit is Media Molecule. You can't put expectations on Media Molecule to perform like a Naughty Dog or a Santa Monica or a Sucker Punch or Guerrilla. You know, their games are so creative and different and things like that, that you can't just assume, hey, they're going to launch games that consistently sell 10, 15, 20 million units. However, you know, you do want to have some financial success as well. And Media Molecule is a studio that really just hasn't had much financial success in a very long time. We have a little bit of info on them, but not really much. To be honest, their project is unknown. We don't really know if it's a new IP or not. We do know that they're on their next project. They've outright confirmed that they are working on a new game. However, is that another Little Big Planet? Is it a new IP? Is it a Tearaway sequel? No. Spoiler alert, it's not a Tearaway sequel. But we really don't know much other than they have another game in the pipeline. Guys, I'm going to rate this one as unlikely. Yes, there's a chance that Sony has them announce something here just to kind of differentiate it. You know, it's like I mentioned, a very creative studio. It would give them something a little different than like kind of the more hardcore-ish games that we think a lot of these other are going to be targeting. But I still have a feeling that Media Molecule is probably not ready to show what they're doing. Even though, again, it's been many years since they shipped a game. I'll be pleasantly surprised if they're here. Love to see it. But I rate this as unlikely. I don't think we're going to get Media Molecule here. Next up, we're going to talk about Naughty Dog. Yes, Naughty Dog, the legendary studio within Sony. Probably the most prestigious studio that Sony has, right? It would be either Naughty Dog or Santa Monica, but I think Naughty Dog is still, even with as good as God of War has been, are seen as the prestige PlayStation studio. We actually know a little bit about what Naughty Dog's up to. Couple things. First of all, of course, The Last of Us multiplayer title in development. This is a very, very big, very ambitious project. You know, way bigger than what the multiplayer was for the original Last of Us. It sounds like this thing is going to be pretty wild and crazy whenever we see it in terms of scope. I don't think this is going to be just like a straight up small, hey, it's essentially a sequel to Factions, because I've noticed Neil Druckmann constantly corrects people whenever they call it Factions 2. Every time someone says Factions 2 or Factions, he literally says, no, the multiplayer project, the multiplayer Last of Us project. So I don't even think maybe the Factions will be in the name. We'll have to see, but this, I think he's kind of doing that because I think the scope is just so much bigger than what the original Factions was that he doesn't want people to think of this as just like, hey, it's a sequel to kind of what you saw before. We also know that Neil Druckmann has started his next single-player game. He outright confirmed this. He said, yes, I've started work on my next project, because he is not the director, by the way, of the Last of Us multiplayer game. Of course, he is a huge, co-president of Naughty Dog. The Last of Us is an IP that he created. I'm sure that he's giving some feedback. I'm sure he's playing this game sometimes and that sort of thing. But his day-to-day job, he is not the director of the Last of Us multiplayer project. He has, however, started the game that he is the director of. Now, is that The Last of Us Part 3? Is that a brand new IP? That is unknown. We just know that Neil Druckmann has started his next game. Guys, Naughty Dog at this showcase is locked in. It's 100% chance. Now, let me clarify a few things here. It's locked in that you're going to see The Last of Us multiplayer game. Neil Druckmann himself essentially confirmed that a while ago whenever he was being interviewed, and he said you'll see The Last of Us multiplayer game later this year. He did not say it was launching later this year, but he did say, yeah, you're going to see it later this year. This is going to be that event. They're going to show The Last of Us multiplayer game here. It makes no sense not to. It's been in development now for many years. I would say if it's not here, that's actually a little worrying, because with as long as this game's been in development, I would think that you're going to show it now, and this is the place to do it. So I'm considering this a lock. Now, in regards to Neil Druckmann's next game, will you see that here? I actually don't consider that a lock. I actually don't even really consider it a maybe. I think that's unlikely. Neil's next game, it sounds like, is pretty early in development. You know, they didn't instantly go from The Last of Us Part 2 straight into his next game. There was actually a little bit of a wait in between there while they were doing some other projects, and Neil was probably trying to lock down exactly what he wanted to do. So you never know. Maybe it's a shocker. If it is The Last of Us Part 3, maybe Sony, after the huge excitement of the show, just wants to even announce this game way early. You never know, but I don't think so. I think Neil's game will not be here, but The Last of Us multiplayer, you gotta think that's a lock. That takes us into Nixxes. I think that's how you pronounce it. I've actually never really know exactly how to pronounce this studio. It's either Nixxes or Nixxes. They are essentially a PC port studio. Don't expect much original content out of this studio, so we're going to go through this very, very quickly, but I think that's very likely. Now, whenever I say it's very likely, I'm not expecting a brand new game from Nixxes. Like, wow, they're making their own project. It's incredible. It's this huge triplet. Not at all. When I say very likely, I'm saying very likely because I'm expecting some PC ports to be announced here at this show. Maybe that's going to be Horizon Forbidden West. I think there's a very good chance that that game is in development for PC. It would make sense for Nixxes to be helping with that, or something else. Like, I doubt we get through this showcase with no PC port announcements, and more than likely Nixxes will be assisting on at least one of those PC ports. So don't expect this to be the most hype, the most exciting announcement here, but it's very likely that they're at least show up in, you know, a thumbnail of a trailer as helping out, you know, with the PC. So we can move on from that super quickly. That's going to take us into Polyphony Digital. Let's be real, guys. This studio, I'm just going to go straight into it. They're not going to be here. And if they are here, it's just going to be like DLC for Gran Turismo 7. They just recently launched Gran Turismo 7. Their next project's unknown. More than likely, that's just Gran Turismo 8. I mean, you would assume. Or some sort of Gran Turismo spinoff. This studio doesn't really do anything but Gran Turismo. And Gran Turismo 7 just recently came out. These Gran Turismo games take many years to make. So it's extremely unlikely you see them here. The only way you see this studio here is if there's some sort of major expansion, like not just new cars, like some sort of massive expansion coming to Gran Turismo 7. You can never rule that out. I think there's going to be enough other things to show here from either first party and third party that you're not going to spend much time here. So this studio, unlikely, not going to be there. That's going to be the case as well for the next studio, and that is San Diego Studio. This studio is the developers of MLB The Show. There's no confirmation that they're working on any other projects of any kind. Guys, let's be real. There's no reason to expect San Diego Studio here. Would be really cool if they had some sort of surprise game in the works that none of us are expecting, but pretty much this is MLB The Show Studio. There's no reason to talk about next year's MLB game considering MLB 23 just came out. This is unlikely. This studio, I'd be shocked if we see San Diego here. Next up, Santa Monica. Yes, another high prestige studio within Sony. Very interesting things happening at Santa Monica Studio right now. Currently, you know, we know that Cory Barlog has some sort of new IP in development. However, we don't know anything about what that game is. We know absolutely nothing about it other than it is probably a new IP. In fact, no, they've confirmed it's a new IP now that I think about it whenever they've done job listings for it. But what that game is, I got no idea, and I expect this game to honestly be nothing like God of War. If it was something that just feels very similar to God of War, Cory would have probably continued working on that franchise. But the fact that he convinced Sony to let him step away, of course, I'm sure he was helpful in the development of Ragnarok in some ways, but he was not the director of that game. Of course, I'm sure he was giving input. I mean, look at God of War 2018, how legendary that game was. There was so much expectations for Ragnarok. I doubt he just completely bailed and ignored the game. You know, we saw Corey lots of times whenever they were doing interviews about Ragnarok and stuff leading up to release. He was the guy that was talking a lot, so I'm sure he was involved, but he was not the director of it. He's been working on some sort of new IP. I'm going to rate Santa Monica Studio as unlikely, but there is some wild cards here. Maybe Corey's new IP is further in development than I expect it to be. I don't think this game's close. I don't think this game's a 2024 release. Maybe it's a 2025 release, and there's a slim chance that Sony wants to generate major hype and excitement for a new Cory Barlog game years in advance. So maybe, but I rate that as pretty slim. And the rest of the studio just shipped Ragnarok, not even a year ago yet, right? It's not even been a year that Ragnarok's been out. So the God of War team, because it sounds like Cory Barlog's new IP team is a little different because they've been hiring up for it, right? They haven't just been poaching from the God of War team. They've been hiring a ton of positions for that. The God of War team's going to be up to something. What that is, who knows? I would say the only way I really see Santa Monica here is, like I said, if they just want to generate hype for Corey's game years in advance, because I can't see this being a 2024 title, and it's definitely not 2023. I would say probably 2025 at the earliest. Or if there's some sort of massive expansion coming to Ragnarok, which you never know. There could be. God of War 2018 never got any sort of big DLC for it. Maybe they want to do that for Ragnarok because they didn't for 2018. You never know, but this to me seems unlikely. I don't think that we see Santa Monica here. Next studio, Sucker Punch, developers of Ghost of Tsushima. It is pretty much likely that they're working on a Ghost of Tsushima sequel. That has never been confirmed by anyone. However, job listings sure sound like a Ghost of Tsushima sequel. The first game was so massively successful, by far the most successful game Sucker Punch has ever done. It was beloved within Japan itself, sold over 1 million copies in Japan, and was huge in the West. I mean, there's literally no reason to not make a sequel. This is 1,000% a Ghost of Tsushima sequel happening. And guys, I would have said that I felt this was very likely. However, unlikely. And that is because Jeff Grubb. I would have really thought there was a great chance that we were going to see Ghost of Tsushima 2 here, or whatever it is they're going to call it. But Jeff Grubb has recently stated that it sounds like they are not going to be here with this game. So I felt pretty good about it. But now, with Jeff Grubb saying that, and I consider Jeff Grubb a pretty reliable source, I would say unlikely, and that is a bit of a surprise to me. I thought there was a good chance Ghost of Tsushima 2 was a 2024 title. However, with this now essentially confirmed, you never know. Maybe Grubb did get it wrong, but typically I trust him. Sounds to me like maybe Tsushima 2 is actually going to be 2025. So, yeah, unfortunately, sounds like Sucker Punch is not going to be here. That takes us into Team Asobi. Yes, Team Asobi. These are the developers of Astrobot. They developed the amazing launch bundled game that comes with the PlayStation 5. Astro's Playroom. Super creative. They're so cool. I love this studio. They are growing. This is a studio that is currently growing. They were just a small, tiny team, and Sony is trying to turn them into like a bigger Japanese studio for them. We know that they're currently working on the biggest game the studio's ever made to date. However, we don't know anything about that. Is that another Astrobot type game? Is it a traditional game? Is it a PSVR 2 game? I mean, we don't know anything about it. Is it a brand new IP? We just know it's a growing studio. They're making the biggest game they ever have. This might sound surprising to you, but I rate this as very likely. I think there's a very good chance Team Asobi is going to announce their game here. It does give, Sony a chance to announce something that's probably going to be family friendly. A lot of these other games we're talking about are probably going to be either M-rated or, targeting older audiences. This is the type of game that can appeal, I would assume, to anyone, kids or adults. The team has been, they haven't had a game since the launch of the PlayStation 5, and even if it's their biggest game to date, I doubt that whatever Team Asobi's making is like unbelievably ambitious. You know what I mean? I doubt this is some sort of project that's like the scope is just out of control. So I think it's going to be ready to be announced, I think it's very likely that we see Team Asobi here announcing their next project, which should be very cool. And that's going to take us into the last studio that we're going to talk about, Valkyrie Entertainment. Now, this is primarily a support studio. They helped a ton with God of War Ragnarok. Their next project is currently unknown, whether that's going to be supporting another PlayStation studio on their game, whether that's going to be making an original project. There has been some job listings and stuff, but in terms of like what they're actually doing, we don't know. We have no idea what they're up to. Like I said, it could be this studio primarily in the past, before Sony bought them, was just known as a support studio. They even helped, I believe, with Halo Infinite, God of War Ragnarok, as I mentioned. They're just like a big support studio in the industry, and Sony bought them. I assume Sony bought them mostly for that reason. I think that they're targeting Valkyrie to be supporting their first-party games, and they didn't want to risk anyone else buying them. I don't really know that Valkyrie's developing their own game. Maybe they are, you never know, but I think the main purpose Sony bought this was be like, hey, we have a ton of giant AAA games that are being developed at all of these studios. We need more support to help these games get shipped. So I'm going to rate this as unlikely. I don't think it's likely we see them here. Now, maybe a game that they are supporting on is going to be announced here. That's entirely possible, but I don't expect like Valkyrie Entertainment themselves. Like, I don't think you're going to see a trailer with a big splash screen that says Valkyrie Entertainment and it's like a new game from them. I could be completely wrong. That would be a super fun surprise, but I'm not expecting it. I'm expecting they're just supporting somebody. And maybe a game gets announced that they're going to be supporting, but I just don't think you see them in any major way at this show. I'd be very, very surprised by that. And guys, that is going to wrap up my look at the PlayStation showcase coming up. That's every single PlayStation studio. Took a quick look into them, what might happen, who might be there, a little bit of info on each studio and what we know and don't know about them. It's going to be very, very exciting. Maybe you agree with some of my takes. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you think it's a lock that Santa Monica's here, or maybe you think, Benji, there's no way that Team Asobi will announce a game. Who knows? Could be fun. Let me know in the comments. Get excited, guys. I think it's going to be a great show tomorrow, and I will see you guys soon. Thanks for watching. As always, stay safe, play some games, and I'll see you guys next time.